Sometimes, betrayal can cut deeper than any wound, especially when it comes from the one you sacrificed everything for. What would you do if the man you saved with your own flesh and blood turned on you, and the family you trusted with your life suddenly wanted you out? The family gathered in the living room that evening, cloaked in a tense silence. My husband lay on the couch, looking frail and pale, each breath seemingly an effort. His eyes, which had once sparkled with life, were dull with pain. His family surrounded me, their faces etched with worry and desperation. My husband's parents, pillars in their community, were known for their influence and wealth. In that moment, they looked vulnerable, pleading with me, though it felt more like an unspoken command. "We can't lose him," his mother whispered, gripping my hands tightly, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. She leaned closer, her voice wavering. "Kate, they say you're a match. If you agree to this, you'll be saving his life. He's your husband, and he needs you now more than ever." 10 years of marriage flashed before me. The quiet mornings, the laughter, the shared dreams of growing old together. Our 2 children, so young, had only begun to understand what it meant to have a father, to feel safe and cherished in his arms. The thought of them growing up without him was unbearable, like a gaping wound I couldn't heal. Even now, I could see the slight tremble in my son's hands as he sat in the corner, clutching his sister, their faces frightened and uncertain. They needed him. I had my own family, of course. My parents and siblings were concerned, telling me to think twice before giving a piece of myself so willingly. "Kate," my mother warned me over the phone one night, her voice thick with worry. "If his family is as powerful as you say, they can find another donor. Let them use their resources, their influence. This is your health, your future." But I couldn't bring myself to wait. I didn't want to watch my husband waste away, knowing I could save him. I felt an unwavering sense of duty, a feeling I couldn't shake, one that told me this was the path I was meant to take. Maybe it was foolish, maybe it was love, or maybe I just didn't want to imagine a life without him. And so I agreed. I agreed to give him a part of me, to give him the chance to watch our children grow up and see their milestones, to stand beside me as we built the life we'd always dreamed of. The surgery was scheduled quickly. It was a surreal experience, the sterile smell of the hospital, the blindingly white walls, the reassuring voices of doctors and nurses as they explained the procedure. I lay there looking over at my husband as he was prepped for surgery. He was fragile, but his eyes held a glimmer of hope, and for the first time in a long time he managed a small smile. After hours that felt like days, the transplant was finally over. My husband and I were both in recovery, and as I lay in that sterile hospital bed, drifting in and out of consciousness, he looked over at me and whispered, "You saved me, Kate. I owe you my life. I'll never forget this. I promise I'll stand by you forever." In that moment, I felt something pure, something beautiful. A feeling of connection, a bond strengthened by sacrifice. I believed him, trusted in the sincerity of his words, and as the days turned into weeks, I felt a sense of accomplishment, pride, and love for the man I had just saved. The weeks that followed were blissful. My husband was recovering well, each day regaining his strength, and he became more attentive, more affectionate. Little gifts, surprise notes, flowers. Every day he found new ways to show his gratitude. He'd bring home tokens of appreciation, from small trinkets to extravagant gifts, telling me that no amount of gratitude could repay the sacrifice I'd made. We started planning a family vacation, something we had always talked about but had never gotten around to doing. Our 2 children were thrilled, and seeing their joy renewed the feeling that everything had been worth it. Those first 6 months post-surgery were like a dream, a blissful bubble in which our family felt closer and more connected than ever. I felt like I had made the right decision, that I had given my husband not just his life back, but a new chance at happiness. But then, something changed. The day it all began, I remember that the sun was shining unusually bright. The house was filled with the sounds of a typical morning, clinking dishes, the hum of the coffee maker, and the distant giggles of my children as they prepared for school. I was in the kitchen, stirring oatmeal on the stove, thinking about the family vacation we'd planned for later that month. It was meant to be a fresh start for us, a celebration of our resilience, our second chance. Suddenly, an intense, sharp pain shot through my abdomen, as though a white-hot knife had been plunged into my side. My knees buckled, and the spoon I was holding clattered to the floor. The room spun, tilting and whirling around me. I reached out, gripping the edge of the counter, but the strength drained from my fingers, and before I knew it, I was crashing to the floor. The last thing I remember was my daughter's frightened scream, her small hands reaching out to me, as my vision faded into darkness. When I woke up, I found myself in a sterile, cold hospital room, the harsh fluorescent lights glaring down from above. My head pounded, and my body felt like it had been wrung dry. I blinked, trying to piece together what had happened. My younger sister's face hovered above me, her eyes filled with worry and exhaustion. "Kate, are you awake?" she asked softly, her voice shaky. It took a few moments for the fog in my mind to clear, for me to fully register where I was and why I was there. What happened? I managed to croak, my throat dry and raw. "You fainted," she replied, brushing a strand of hair away from my face. "I found you on the kitchen floor. You were unconscious." I was so scared. She held my hand tightly, her fingers trembling. A wave of guilt washed over me. I hated that I had put her through this, that she'd had to see me so vulnerable and helpless. But as I lay there, a more pressing question gnawed at me. Did you call my husband?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She hesitated, her eyes dropping to the floor before she nodded. "Yes, I called him. I tried multiple times. He wouldn't pick up. Finally, when he did, he said he was busy." She let out a frustrated sigh, her voice edged with anger. "Busy, Kate. You're in the hospital, and he's busy." I wanted to protest, to tell her it was probably just a misunderstanding. Maybe he was caught up in something urgent. After all, he'd been so caring since the surgery, showering me with affection, gifts, and reassurances. But as I lay there, staring at the hospital ceiling, a creeping doubt began to take root in my mind. Something about his absence felt wrong. The hours passed slowly, each tick of the clock amplifying the emptiness I felt. Nurses came and went, checking my vitals, adjusting my IV drip, their faces a blur. But he never showed up. My husband, the man I had sacrificed so much for, the one I had given a piece of myself to save, didn't even walk through the hospital doors. When I was finally discharged, I felt hollow, like something essential had been drained from me that couldn't be replaced. My sister drove me home in silence, her hands gripping the wheel tightly, her jaw set. I knew she wanted to say something, to voice her anger, her disappointment, but I wasn't ready to hear it. Not yet. As we pulled up to the house, I braced myself. Maybe he was inside, pacing anxiously, waiting for me with apologies and explanations. Maybe he had been dealing with his own fears, his own worries, and just hadn't known how to handle them. I clung to that hope, to that version of him that had once made promises to stand by me forever. But when I pushed open the door, all I found was a chilling indifference. There he was, sprawled out on the living room couch, the TV remote in one hand, his eyes glazed over as he watched some mindless show. He looked up as I walked in, a flicker of recognition crossing his face. For a brief moment, I thought I saw a flash of concern, a shadow of the man who had once cared so deeply. But it was gone as quickly as it came. "You're home," he muttered, his voice flat, almost mechanical. He turned back to the TV, as though I were nothing more than an afterthought, a minor interruption in his day. I stood there, frozen, 1,000 words bubbling up inside me, each one lodged painfully in my throat. I wanted to scream, to shake him, to make him understand the depth of his betrayal. But instead, I swallowed it all down, pushing the pain deep inside. "Did you know I was in the hospital?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, struggling to keep it steady. "Yeah, your sister told me," he replied, not bothering to look at me, his gaze still fixed on the screen. "But I had a lot going on at work. I couldn't just drop everything." His words hit me like a slap. Work. That's what he was worried about. Not me. Not the woman who had given up a part of herself to save him. Not the mother of his children. Just work. As I stood there, I felt a shift inside me, a hardening of something that had once been soft and pliable. I had always been the one to forgive, to make excuses, to believe in the best version of him. But now, as I looked at him, lounging on that couch with a casual indifference that cut deeper than any physical wound, I realized something. This wasn't the man I thought I knew. This wasn't the man I had sacrificed everything for. My sister's words from earlier that day echoed in my mind, a haunting reminder of the truth I had been too blind to see. After everything you did for him, this is how he repays you, not even showing up when you're in the hospital. I wanted to brush her words aside, to cling to the belief that he was still the man who had held my hand in that hospital bed, who had looked into my eyes and promised to stand by me forever. But the more I tried to hold on to that image, the more it slipped away, like sand through my fingers. As the days turned into weeks, I began to notice other things, small cracks in the facade that I had once ignored. He would come home late, sometimes not at all, his excuses growing thinner and more transparent with each passing day. He stopped bringing me gifts, stopped taking the kids on outings, stopped showing even the smallest gestures of affection. It was as if he had simply forgotten the promises, the gratitude, the life we had once shared. I tried to confront him, to remind him of the sacrifices I had made, of the life we had built together. But each time he would brush me off, his tone dismissive, his eyes distant. And then, one night, as I lay awake in bed, listening to the sound of his breathing, I realized something that shattered what was left of my heart. He wasn't just neglecting me, he was punishing me. For what, I didn't know, but I could feel it in every cold glance, every half-hearted response, every moment of indifference that had replaced the warmth we had once shared. And as that realization sank in, I felt a surge of anger, a burning resentment that consumed me from the inside out. I had given him everything: my love, my loyalty, even a part of my own body. And in return, he had given me nothing. Each passing day seemed to be a cruel joke, with my husband growing colder and more distant. He would leave the house without a word, returning late at night if he came back at all. It seemed I had become invisible to him, nothing more than a shadow in his life. Every little thing set him off, whether it was the food being too cold or the kids being too loud. He would erupt, shouting at me for things that never mattered before. This went on for weeks, months even. I tried to hold on to some hope, convincing myself that maybe he was under stress or that he just needed time. But as days bled into nights, I came to the bitter realization that he was no longer the man I had fallen in love with. He was a stranger, someone who no longer cared about my well-being, someone who found joy in my pain. One afternoon, as I sat quietly in the living room, I heard the front door creak open. It was my husband, but he wasn't alone. He walked in with his parents, their expressions unreadable, accompanied by a young woman I didn't recognize. She looked composed, almost indifferent, as though she had been rehearsing for this very moment. I put on a brave face, forcing a smile as I greeted them. "Welcome," I said, my voice steady, even as my heart pounded with unease. My father-in-law wasted no time. With a stern look, he began speaking, his voice laced with disappointment and authority. "Kate," he said, "we've come to discuss a very important matter. Your husband has shared some concerns with us. He has told us that, due to your weakness, you're unable to fulfill your duties as a wife, especially at night." He paused, allowing his words to sink in, and my mind raced, reeling from the weight of what he was implying. Because of this, he continued, glancing briefly at the young woman beside him, "We have decided to help you. To ease your burden, we found a suitable co-wife for you. She'll help you with the things you can no longer manage." My heart shattered in that moment, each word slicing through me like a knife. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My mind scrambled to make sense of it all, to find some explanation for how this had come to be. A co-wife? They thought this was helping me? My mother-in-law chimed in, her tone softer but just as cutting. "This arrangement is for your own good, Kate. She'll be able to satisfy your husband's needs at night and handle some of the cooking. You're too frail, my dear. We're only trying to make things easier for you." Her words dripped with a twisted kind of pity, as if they were doing me some grand favor by forcing this woman into my life. I fought to hold back tears to keep from crumbling in front of them. Swallowing my pride, I nodded and excused myself, retreating to the bedroom, the one place that had always been mine, my sanctuary. But even here, there was no peace. Moments later, the door opened, and to my shock, it was my so-called co-wife, followed closely by my mother-in-law. They stepped inside without hesitation, surveying the room as though it already belonged to them. My heart raced as I tried to comprehend their boldness. My mother-in-law turned to the young woman with a smile, gesturing toward the bed. "This will be where you'll stay with him," she said matter-of-factly, as though I weren't standing right there, as though I were already invisible. Then she looked at me with a look that was both condescending and dismissive. "Kate, you should move to the guest house," she said, her words casual, as though she were asking me to pass the salt. I stood there numb, as a wave of humiliation washed over me. The thought of being uprooted from my own bedroom, from the place where I had poured so much love, so much of myself, made my blood boil. But I held it in, every ounce of my strength going toward maintaining my composure. I was not going to let them see me break, not here, not now. Without another word, I turned and left the room, my mind racing as I walked toward the guest house. Once inside, I locked the door and leaned against it, finally allowing myself to feel the depth of my hurt. My heart ached, my hands shook, and I found myself gasping for air as the weight of their betrayal settled on my chest. For hours, I sat in silence, grappling with my own anguish, feeling trapped in a nightmare I couldn't escape. I was a prisoner in my own home, exiled to a corner like an unwanted guest. It was as though I had become a stranger in my own life, relegated to a place I no longer recognized. Days passed, and life took on a surreal, distorted quality. The woman, my supposed co-wife, settled in without a hint of shame, moving about the house as though she had been there all along. She cooked meals for my husband, shared meals with him, and even took over small duties with my children, as though she were entitled to them. My husband was hardly home, but when he was, he would barely glance in my direction. His coldness was like a slap to the face, a brutal reminder that he no longer cared, that he had replaced me with someone new. I could feel the distance between us widening, a chasm that seemed impossible to bridge. But amid the despair, I found a strange kind of clarity. I realized that I had been holding on to a lie, a twisted version of love that no longer existed. I had sacrificed everything for him, for his family, for the life we had built together, but they had never seen my worth, had never valued me for who I truly was. I began to look at them differently, not with love or loyalty, but with a cold, detached understanding. They were nothing more than people who had taken advantage of my kindness, my devotion, my willingness to give. And now that I had nothing left to offer, they had cast me aside without a second thought. One evening, as I sat in the guest house, I realized that I had come to a crossroads. I could either continue to live in this state of quiet suffering, allowing them to dictate the terms of my life, or I could take back control, chart my own path, and find a way to rebuild what they had tried to destroy. In the days that followed, my resolve grew stronger. I began to plot my revenge, the bitterness inside me morphing into a burning desire for justice. I had given him my love, my life, and now he had the audacity to bring another woman into our home, treating me like I was disposable. It was time for him to feel the weight of his actions. I started small, introducing him to some illegal drugs I had managed to acquire. Each day I would slip a little more into his drinks, enough to make him feel euphoric, but not enough to raise suspicion. I watched as he began to rely on these substances, his mood fluctuating between highs and crushing lows. The more he fell under their spell, the more I felt a sense of control. But I wanted more than just to see him weakened. I had witnessed how the drugs ravaged lives, and I wanted him to feel the consequences of his choices. It was time to introduce something more dangerous. I managed to get my hands on a potent substance that could mimic kidney failure, the very same condition that had once plagued him. It was a calculated risk, but I was ready to take it. If he wanted to treat me like a nobody, I would ensure he experienced a taste of the chaos he had brought into my life. One night, as he returned home, I greeted him with a smile, pretending everything was normal. I poured him a drink laced with the drug, watching as he downed it greedily, unaware of the storm brewing within him. With each passing day, I increased the dosage, reveling in his gradual decline. He became a shadow of the man he once was, plagued by fatigue, irritability, and frequent health issues. His new wife, oblivious to the true cause of his struggles, was left to pick up the pieces while I savored the sweet taste of revenge. After weeks of tormenting him, the final blow came when he collapsed one evening, clutching his side in pain. I rushed to his side, feigning concern as I called for help. As the paramedics arrived, I stood back, watching with satisfaction as they loaded him into the ambulance. The look of fear in his eyes as he realized the severity of his condition was a moment I would savor forever. While he was in the hospital, I filed for divorce, citing his inability to care for our family and his reckless behavior. I ensured that all the evidence pointed to his drug use and health neglect, painting him as the irresponsible husband he had become. The divorce proceedings began, and I made it clear that I intended to claim half of his assets, all while he languished in the hospital bed, his health deteriorating. When the divorce was finalized, I walked away with my share, the house, the cars, and enough money to start anew. I could finally breathe, free from the chains that had bound me for so long. I had taken back control of my life, my dignity, and my future. As for him, he would remain a cautionary tale, a man who lost everything due to his own choices. His new wife could take care of him now. He was no longer my problem. I had emerged victorious, reclaiming what was rightfully mine, and I wouldn't look back. The life I had built for myself was just beginning, and I was ready to embrace it with open arms. But I felt a bittersweet sense of closure. I had done what I needed to reclaim my dignity, but in those quiet moments alone, I couldn't ignore the lesson I had learned. Revenge had brought me satisfaction, yes, but it also left me realizing that true strength isn't found in vengeance. It's found in self-respect and the power to walk away. For anyone listening to this story, remember this: the people who genuinely value you will show it, not just in words but in consistent actions. Love isn't something that should cost you your peace, health, or self-worth. And if someone ever makes you feel like less, don't lose yourself trying to prove them wrong. Instead, find the courage to stand tall and walk away. The best revenge is often living well, free from the weight of those who don't deserve you.
If you found this story gripping, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss out on more intense and eye-opening stories just like this one. And remember, your support means everything. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.